Now, this whole thing about the ego in Steiner, it's important to differentiate this from Jung's ego because it's not the same thing. If you sort of take Jung's idea of the ego and take it together with the self, then you have what Steiner's talking about by the presence of an ego. Whereas the astral body gives consciousness, the ego gives us self-consciousness. And the presence of self-consciousness is something that the human world has that none of these other kingdoms have. So this ego thing is a very large thing. It's not as specialized as it is in Jung and Freud. And it's the spiritual monad that undergoes reincarnation, the ego does. And the animals don't have this. They share kind of group souls. So this is a thing that's transmigrating from lifetime to lifetime. And there's a sort of lower ego and a higher ego. The lower ego is more involved in the body and the flesh. And the higher ego is the one that needs to awaken towards spirituality. It's very similar to the Neoplatonic doctrine of reason and the nous, the higher reason, the transcendental, gaining control of the passions and so forth. So that now the key thing then in Steiner is that the ego has to gain control of these lower functions. And this is a difficult task. The gaining control of the astral body is almost a natural part of just maturing. I mean, gaining control of your passions and desires is something we normally associate with maturity. Teenagers have less control over their astral bodies than adults do. So there's a certain amount where this process unfolds naturally. But even further beyond that, the ego can gain control of the astral body, and not just gain control of it, but there are certain exercises that can be done that will develop it. And certain exercises that will then develop the etheric body, and the etheric body has to do not only with the formative forces, but also with deep-seated things like character, temperament, deep-seated habits. As we'll see, the etheric body also has to do with things that have to do with habit, memory, routine. They sink into the etheric body. So the etheric is lower than the astral. And the astral can imprint things on the etheric and teach the etheric things, and the etheric will then shape the physical body. So we have a key here to how yoga works. What the yogis are doing is they're sort of shaping these bodies. They're getting control of the astral body and teaching it to shape the etheric body, and then they can do these miracles with their physical body. So that Steiner recognized all of this, so it's very compatible with the Far East in many, many respects, but also very different. So this is the sort of key thing. These four sheaths are the most essential thing to understand in Steiner, because everything will unfold out of them. And this is the sort of fourfold model, but now he has a sevenfold model. So there's a sevenfold model and a ninefold model. And let's see, what's the best way to do this? The sevenfold model, if we put the ego up here, and we say that there's even a threefold model, because man, the human being is body, soul, and spirit. And so these three represent body. They all have in some respect to do with the physical, and then we'll have soul, and then spirit. Man is a trifold being. Whereas Jung will always emphasize fourfoldness, Steiner is still locked into the trifoldness. So you're always going to see these repetitions of threes in Steiner. The physical body has a higher spiritual seed within it that can be sublimated and can grow out of it. Let's do it this way. Get them all up here first. And then the spirit body. Okay. It's called the spirit body. I mean, these terms are awkward, but this is how they're translated into English. I suspect the German is more profound. So the physical body has a spirit body seed that can be brought into perfection. The etheric body has a life spirit that can be brought into perfection, and the astral body has a spirit self. And he uses Hindu terminology for this. He says the spirit self is manas, the life spirit is the buddhi, and the spirit body is atma. But the way he uses these terms have actually little to do with the way the Hindus use them. So they're just good to identify, because sometimes the translators will change these. As long as you have the Sanskrit term, you know what the translator's talking about. So they're good to keep in mind just for that reason. So the task of spiritual initiation is something in Steiner that is unfolding epically, in terms of the destiny of the human race, we're gradually unfolding these sheaths. Right now we're in the stage of the ego that's being unfolded. Northern European civilization is developing the ego in a way that, and to an intensity and degree that it has never been developed before in history. And in the future, man will move on into these higher stages, as we'll see in his evolutionary model, naturally. But individuals can, if they choose, also move in this lifetime into these areas. Once this is achieved, reincarnation will stop, just as it does in the Hindu system. The whole goal of reincarnation is the gradual perfection of these lower bodies into these upper spiritual bodies. So if you choose, you can apply what Steiner calls spiritual science or initiation, and we'll look at a couple of those exercises, toward these lower sheaths in order to bring them into perfection. It takes a long time to do it. It's very concentrated, very patient. He outlines all of this in How to Know Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, or How to Know Higher Worlds. That's the book you want to read if you want to see all the details. We won't get too much into the details, because there are areas of it that I don't understand. Steiner's very difficult in trying to understand every little thing. It's very difficult. I can get the structural sense of this, but some of the connotations escape me. So we have those. And then with respect to the soul now, that's the sevenfold model of the human being. 3, 3, 7. But now he says there are three aspects of the ego as well, / soul. The soul is the ego. And each one of those has a unit, a sort of component that is linked to these other three. We have the sentient soul, which is the one that's closest linked to the astral body. The astral body is the vehicle that enables us to perceive things. When you're in the life between death and birth, you're in Bardo, you still have the astral body, and that enables you to perceive all the gods and divinities and beings. When that crumbles and disintegrates, you can no longer see anything. So the senses are linked with the astral body. But now the sentient soul is something that differentiates out of it, and it has to do with sort of pictorial imagery, as we'll see. And then the etheric body has a intellectual or mind soul. The intellect sort of differentiates out of the etheric body, and the reason that it does that is because the etheric body has to do with memory, and you can't learn anything without memory. So, as he'll say in his model of infancy, in the development of the child, he'll say, you generally don't want to teach children to read before the age of 7. And that disagrees with our sort of theory of, at 5, throw them into kindergarten and get them going. He says the reason you don't want to do this is because the etheric body is still working on the child's physical body. And it doesn't come to maturity, the etheric body, until the age of 7. And that's Saturn, square Saturn. Steiner's life cycle model, as we'll see, nicely fits into the 7-year Saturn cycle. At the age of 7, the child loses its teeth. And that's the signal that it's changing, and the hard teeth come in, and the etheric body is done. It's ready now to be freed and used for other things, because at that point it's done shaping the human physical body, and now it can be freed up for the development of the child's memory. So this is why around the age of 7, the child begins to acquire faculties of memory that it didn't have before, because now the etheric body is freed up and can be used. So then you can start teaching children how to read and how to learn to remember things. So this is how the mind soul will differentiate out of the etheric body. And then we just have the consciousness soul that comes out of, sometimes this is translated as spirit soul, but that's confusing because it just links over with spirit. Although it is the one that's most closely linked to the spirit. The consciousness soul is the highest of these three souls, whereas the sentient soul is the lowest. It's bound to the astral. The consciousness soul is the highest, and it's linked to the next phase over, the spirit body. And the consciousness soul is actually the epoch of civilization that we're in. Steiner says since about, since 1413 AD, we've been developing the consciousness soul as a species, as a Northern European civilization has specialized in developing the consciousness soul. And the way in which that works is the consciousness soul really has to do with the sense of the I, the ego, the sense of freedom that goes along with that, and the will. And the will comes up out of the physical body. So that, let's say, the difference between these three is, let's say, I'm looking at the outer world and I'm perceiving things with